Yeah, I'm going to discuss about more into the Reformation, 30 Years' War being the main thing that we'll kind of talk about. I'll talk about some treaties that they had that were kind of famous that were kind of made between Protestants and Catholics, like they have the so-called Peace of Augsburg. I'll talk about that, and I'll even talk about the Edict of Nantes as well, developed in France. So I'm going to, of course, continue, like I said, talking about the Reformation. Of course, one of the first things I'm going to talk about is this thing called the Peace of Augsburg, which you can see here. It's called different names. They either call it the Augsburg Settlement, or some people call it, of course, the other name, Peace of Augsburg, which was actually signed on September 25th, 1555. It was actually a treaty that was signed between basically Catholics and Lutherans in Germany, which would be, by the way, the Holy Roman Empire at the time. And involved, you can see there, Emperor Charles V was involved in that. He was the ruler of Germany. He was also the king of Spain at the time. And it was signed between the Catholics in Germany and this alliance of princes that were called the Geopolitical League, which was an alliance of German princes that were Lutheran, and the name came from a German city that was in Bavaria that was called Schmalkalden, so hence the name being used later to describe it. And what ends up happening with this Peace of Augsburg is it divides Germany up into mostly two main religious sects, which are Catholic, of course, and Lutheran, which was based on the ruler's religion. Like whoever the ruler is of a state will get to decide the communion, whether it be Catholic or Lutheran. And there was actually a saying that went with it, you may have heard of, which is cuius regio eius religio, which, if you want the English translation from Latin, it means whose realm, his religion. So whoever the monarch is, prince or whatever, he'll get to decide what communion they'll have to practice, Catholic or Lutheran. The only bad thing about the Peace of Augsburg was it did not include those that were like Calvinistic, type sects, or Anabaptist either. They couldn't actually get any religious freedom out of that. But they did give them like a grace period where people could move. So you could, like, if you were Catholic and you were in a Lutheran area, you could move to a area where you had the same religion and all that. So they did have that, but because of the fact that other groups like Anabaptists, Calvinists didn't have religious rights, it does kind of spawn a bunch of religious conflicts later, especially the 30 Years' War in Germany. It was one of the worst things that happened. Now let me also move on to talk about something else. All right, here's a map showing you, by the way, basically kind of what happened after they did this treaty, this Peace of Augsburg. You can see how that part of Europe separated. So northern Germany became mostly Lutheran. You can see that there. You see all the other areas are Catholic. And then also you go into like Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, all those areas became Lutheran. And so Europe does kind of look like that for a long time, at least up to the 20th century it does, like maybe up to around World War I or so. But of course it'll change later. But that's basically how things looked back then. So I think there's another image showing you, I think it's like an older map, which is right here, kind of similar to with all the countries in there as well. But anyway, I'm going to, of course, move on to also talk about another event that happened in what is France. France went through some religious wars too, as well, which what they called over there was the French Wars of Religion, which lasted from like 1562 to about 1598. And it was actually a conflict between two different religious groups in France. Yeah, those that were Roman Catholic, of course, which France majority is still today. And then those are what they call French Calvinists, Protestants that followed like the ideology of John Calvin. They were called Huguenots in France. So those two actually went through a lot of violence I'll get to it later. It spawns this incident called the St Bartholomew's Day Massacre that occurs in 1572, which was like the peak of it. There was a famous woman associated with the actual French Wars of Religion. It kind of peaks under her reign. They often call it when she's kind of in power with her sons. He had 3 sons that were actually at one point ruled over France. They often call it the age of Catherine de' Medici. If you know about the Medicis were famous noble family that came from Italy. And she had 3 sons that reigned as king at one point, which I'll put on the screen here. But Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. Those are all her sons. And they actually reigned as some of the last kings of the Valois dynasty, which was a French dynasty of France that went back to the Middle Ages. And under their reign, she had a lot of power. She practically controlled the country overall. And so that's why they often call it the so-called age of Catherine de' Medici and all that. And apparently, she helped to spawn a lot of the violence between the Catholics and the Huguenots. And there was an incident where apparently, go to this picture, which is right here. She had a daughter who was named Margaret of Valois. And she married Henry of Navarre, who was actually a Huguenot. You see on the left. He would later be Henry IV, King Henry IV, who later would be the first Bourbon king of France, the Bourbon dynasty. And apparently this marriage spawned a lot of violence between, I guess the Catholics didn't like the Protestants, intermarrying with them. And so it spawned this incident, which, of course, I showed a picture of kind of what it is, of course, which is the so-called St Bartholomew's Day Massacre, which occurred, they think, in August of 1572. And it was like basically a bunch of like Catholic mob violence, where they basically, like a witch hunt, hunted down people that were, Protestant Huguenots. There was even assassinations where they killed certain leaders of the Huguenots, which I think this painting here is very famous, which you see here. It's a very famous painting done by this French Huguenot painter named Francois Dubois. It's often called the St Bartholomew's Day Massacre, I think done this same year of the event. It does depict a lot of the actual violence, mostly in Paris, of people being killed. It also depicts this admiral, I think I'll put him on the screen here, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny. He was actually one of the principal leaders of the Huguenots. He was actually killed. And they practically threw his body out of a window, which you can kind of see in that image right there, that 3-story building on the right, where his body's kind of hanging out the window. And so they believe this was really the peak violence of the whole French Wars of Religion. And they're not sure exactly the number. It kind of varies on it, but they think as many as 3 million casualties may have taken place during the French Wars of Religion over a period of like more than 4 decades that this happened. Now, how many people died with the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre? They're not sure. I think some of those numbers have been exaggerated by Protestants. I think some range from 10 to 30,000. I've seen some sites, like websites, even online, where they'll say a few million were killed, but it wasn't that many. It was probably that amount or something like that. So what happened was eventually, because of course, I had that picture I showed you earlier of Henry IV. He eventually will issue what they call the Edict of Nantes, 1598. When he became king, I think in 1589, I told you, starting the Bourbon dynasty, and he'll issue this edict, which basically officially ended the whole French wars of religion, and so that'll eventually come to an end. And so here's the Edict of Nantes right here, what it basically did. So it restored peace to France. You can see it gave Huguenots religious freedom, so they could have their own churches, their own schools throughout France. They can even hold political offices, which is something they couldn't do before. They were even being able to rule over like towns, like mayors of towns and things like that. And France got rid of that concept, you can see, where they believed in this idea of one king, one law, one religion. Catholicism would still be, the official religion of France still, but they wouldn't persecute people if they had a different religion. So Huguenots would still have to give money, though. They still had to, pay church tithes, the Catholic Church, and I think they even had to honor various holidays of the Catholic Church as well. So they still had to respect the Catholic ideology and church and all that, even though they had religious freedom. Today in France, by the way, France is mostly Catholic still, but 41% of the population still Catholic, 40% no religion, by the way, 19% for other religions, which, by the way, Protestantism is not the second largest religion behind the Catholic faith. It's actually Islam, which is like 5%. And I'll get to it later. We won't talk about it today. But Louis XIV later in 1685 revoked the Edict of Nantes, and he forced the Huguenots, the Protestants in France, to either convert to Catholicism or leave the country. And so today, they say in France, only about 2% of the population is actually Protestant. So they're kind of a minority. They used to have way more. And a lot of the nobility were even Protestant, stuff like that. That changed, of course, after. So anyway, I'm going to, of course, move on and talk about a few other things, of course, today. I'm going to get into another major event that takes place at the end, of course, of the Reformation, which is the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was really the peak of really the violence, if you want to say the amount of violence and conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Europe, which you can see lasts about 1618 to 1648. And the 30 Years' War is primarily this war that was fought in Germany and surrounding states between those that were Catholic and pro-Protestant states. But it actually, by the end of the war, I think if you read about it, it kind of became not just religious, but political, maybe even economic, because I think they say this is one of the last major conflicts in Europe, which is more based on religious ideas rather than, say, other ideas that were more important later, like economic, political. Now, I'm going to get into and talk about what actually caused the Reformation to break out. Part of it had to do with religious tensions that were within the so-called Habsburg Empire that was mostly reigning in the southern part of Germany, which would be like where Austria is today, like Austria and Hungary. Habsburgs, of course, that dynasty or House of Habsburg controlled a lot of the Holy Roman Empire. It went back to the late Middle Ages. And they had a ruler that took over right around when the war started, which his name was Emperor Ferdinand II. And Ferdinand II, who I've got a picture of right here, was a staunch supporter of the Counter-Reformation, where he wanted to basically reconvert certain areas of Germany back to being Catholic. And so Ferdinand II was a supporter of stopping the spread of Protestantism throughout Europe. And so what happens eventually, what's going to occur, it's going to lead to different sides that will oppose each other in this war. And so I'll kind of go through a list of them that were on both sides. On the Catholic side, we're talking about you had mostly the House of Habsburg, which included like the Holy Roman Empire, Austria. It's kind of in it. It was in it, of course. So that's where the Austrian Habsburgs were based. Spain, Spanish Empire, of course, was also involved. I think Bavaria was another area that was also involved, etc. And now on the Protestant side, you had a lot of other powers that were there, like the Swedes. Sweden, of course, was involved. Denmark, Norway, they sometimes called it, was involved. Saxony, Prussia was involved. A lot of these areas were going Protestant, Northern Europe. Then France, believe it or not, more near the end, start to come in too. Actually, back the Protestant side, not for religious reasons, but it was more political than anything. Now, there is a famous incident that actually caused the beginning of the 30 Years' War. There's this thing called the Second Defenestration, you may have heard of, that happened in Bohemia. And apparently these Catholic representatives went to go talk to the Protestant ones there. And what the Protestants did was they threw them out of a window, like three of the actual representatives. Like you see that third window at the top, that's one at the top there. They got thrown out the window. And amazingly, it was considered a miracle that they didn't die. According to Protestants, what happened was they fell on a dung heap that was down there, and they were saved. They didn't get killed. And then I think the Protestants said, actually the Catholics said that it was angels that saved them from dying, that kind of thing. So this started in actually Bohemia, which is now called the Czech Republic, where Prague is today, like its capital. And so it was known as the Defenestration of Prague, or I think it's usually called, like dubs the name. And so both sides basically form up military alliances to fight each other in the 30 Years' War. You've got the so-called Catholic League, which the Habsburgs pretty much back. And all those countries in the north that are more pro-Protestant, they form their own alliance, which is called, of course, they call it the Protestant Union, or they have another name they call it too, I'll mention, which is called later the Heilbronn League, was another name that they also called it as well. So a lot of these states that are Calvinistic or Lutheran were involved in support of the Protestant side, of course, in the war. Now, I'll kind of talk about the war itself. The war, kind of showing you some the complexity of the 30 Years' War, which it was. It was kind of a complicated war, very bloody war too. One of the bloodiest conflicts in modern Europe. And you can see it went through multiple phases, like at least 4 or 5 phases of the war occurred, where you had a Bohemian phase, there was a Danish phase, there was a Swedish phase, there was a Swedish-French type phase as well. And one of the first phases, I guess I usually talk about, it was one that was called the Bohemian phase, where what happened was in Bohemia, the people that were Protestant revolted against the Catholic side. And it's really the first part of the war. It begins the whole thing at that point. And so both sides eventually fought it out in a battle, which was kind of important, at least in that region, which was called the Battle of White Mountain. And it happened on November 8th, 1620. And the Bohemian forces had raised up, I think, something like 15,000 troops to fight the Holy Roman Empire's armies, which were much larger, like something like 27,000. And what happened was they got routed. They basically decisively, the Habsburg side, they basically routed the Protestant forces in the battle. And what occurred was that whole area of Bohemia was reconverted to being all Catholic. So all the Protestants were forced out at that point. And for a long time, by the way, that area is mostly Catholic up to like the 20th century. I don't know how. I think the religion's kind of changed a lot since then, since the time of the Nazis and the communists that came in later. But most of the area is Catholic, for a long time because of it. They also have a deal where different monarchs came in. I'll kind of show you this right here. But foreign powers start to come in to try to help out the Protestant side, of course, in the war. On the left, there was a king named Christian IV. He was the king of Denmark and Norway. He led a lot of the Protestant forces in the war in the 1620s. He was actually not very successful in the 30 Years' War, but he was in power a long time. I think in what is Denmark, Norway, he was in power for something like almost 60 years as the king. He was more known for founding the capital of Norway, which is Oslo, you may have heard of. That's what he's known for now. But Denmark, Norway was not that powerful, compared to some of these other states in Europe they had. Now, the guy on the right, you see there, that's King Augustus Adolphus, who was a famous king of Sweden and their empire. That was kind of forming at that time, the Swedish Empire. And Swedes were becoming pretty powerful, around the Baltic. And he was called by a lot of things in Sweden, the Lion of the North, Gustavus Adolphus the Great, etc. And he was actually famous for a battle where Protestant sides were victorious, which I'll show you here, which is the Battle of Lutzen. That happened in northern Germany and happened on November 16th, 1632. And in a narrow Protestant victory, the Protestant side defeated what was really probably a more better Holy Roman Empire army, because I think it was led by these legendary generals that were big. I think it was one guy named Wallenstein and Peppenheim who was killed in the battle, which was pretty amazing. But Adolphus was killed, though, which kind of demoralized, I think, some of the Swedes afterwards. He died at the young age of only 37 in battle. And so it kind of caused the Swedes to be disillusioned about the war because it was kind of, dragging on. There was a heavy loss of civilian life in the 30 Years' War. But the French were starting to kind of get worried about what the Habsburgs were doing in Europe. And so under the Bourbon monarch, Louis XIII, who was the son of King Henry IV, he decided under his minister, Cardinal Richelieu, to try and back a lot of the Protestant anti-Habsburg forces that were in Europe. And so France kind of formed an alliance with Sweden at the end of the war. They think that's really what changed the whole outcome of the 30 Years' War and why the Protestant side eventually won the war in the end. So that's pretty much the reason. Other countries even joined in, like England and a few other countries kind of supported the Protestant side also as well. The Bourbons were really fearful that their empire the French Empire would get surrounded by all these Habsburg states like Spain, Austria. You got the Netherlands, the Austrian Netherlands. I guess that area, maybe they were kind of worried about that area right there. So actually, the Spanish, I think, controlled the Netherlands at the time, but basically they were kind of concerned about Habsburgs kind of surrounding them. Now, the last thing I'm going to get into and talk about with, of course, the 30 Years' War, I want to talk about the end of the war, because it does take them years to kind of eventually hammer out a peace agreements between both sides. Of course, like I said, because of the French support, it led basically to France and other countries that were more pro-Protestant supporting or forcing really those Habsburg states to sue for peace. France ends up becoming the major power in Europe afterwards. And as you see there, it hammers out eventually a series of treaties that were later called the Peace of Westphalia, which some people call it the Treaty of Westphalia also as well. They call it different names, but they usually call it peace because of the fact that there were multiple treaties that were involved in it. And there were really two main treaties that were part of. You can see there was one called, you see on the bottom there, Osnabrück, and then the other one was called Munster. There were some other treaties hammered out too later, I think, as well. But those are the two main ones that were famous. I'll kind of talk about some things with the treaty that were kind of not as well known, but they did kind of come out of it. One of the big things that came out of it was that you get a lot of these countries in Northern Europe that are mostly, especially Protestant, that become more independent. So the Dutch Republic, I think, was one of the main states that kind of broke away and became independent afterwards. The Dutch Republic had ended a long, long war with Spain, which I think was called the 80 Years' War, which had dragged on from like 1568 to 1648. And I think I think the Dutch called it the Dutch War for Independence, is what they nicknamed it. And it led to the so-called Dutch Golden Age that'll kind of come after that. And the Dutch even get into like exploration, even take over part of like the East. They're in like the East Indies and all that, as you know. And and then like Switzerland became more independent. Prussia is going to start to kind of break away from the rest, like the Holy Roman Empire and Germany and all that. They'll become like a separate state, German state, over time. Another thing that happened too was Calvinism was forced to be recognized afterwards as an official religion in Germany, and not just the Catholics or the Lutherans, because that was the only thing about the Peace of Augsburg, was that it didn't include people that were Calvin, Calvinistic churches, etc. But the sad thing is that the Anabaptists that we talked about before, they weren't given any religious rights or anything like that. So I think both sides, the Protestants and Catholics, didn't like them either. So they kind of, that's why a lot of them fled later, I think, Europe, and like the Amish, Mennonites end up, like in the United States or something like that over time. Historians do think that the Peace of Westphalia, it kind of helped create the modern European state system. So kind of the way the countries are kind of formed in Europe, the way they are now, it's kind of starting to look like what it does with this series of treaties that were signed. They do think the Congress of Vienna, which happened after the Napoleonic Wars, and the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, also kind of, decide also the European state system that they have as well. Like I said, France was the major power in Europe pretty much after this whole war. They come out as really the big power overall. Holy Roman Empire kind of weakens within. It's not as powerful afterwards. In fact, Austria kind of starts to kind of center around like Vienna and Hungary, while later kind of forming like an Austrian type empire that'll be separate. And then in the north, you got northern Germany kind of breaks up into, of course, different states that are there. It was one of the bloodiest. Kind of show you kind of a map showing you some of the map of the actual atrocities and the deaths that were in the war. You can see Germany lost about 1/3 of its total population, including, by the way, you can see half of the male population was actually wiped out. That's amazing. Now, by the way, I think I don't have there, see up at the top there, 8 million. They think 8 million casualties may have been the amount of people that may have been killed, wounded, or whatever in the war. It is the third, by the way, bloodiest conflict in modern European history. The other two would be World War II, be number one, and then World War I would be the second. So this is kind of give you an idea of that. And that's part of why Germany takes a long time to really unify. The Germans, if you know about it, don't really unify until really the late 19th century. And so you're going to see later Prussia, it's going to take a while, but Prussia in the north is going to emerge as a separate German state from especially Austria, that's more in the south. And then France, like I see on the bottom, will come the big power, the land power that's in Europe as well. Also, I did want to show you too I think kind of this image here, which kind of sometimes sums up, a lot of the atrocities that were committed in the 30 Years' War. And there was a famous French printmaker named Jacques Collot who made a bunch of these etchings that kind of described a lot of the miseries of the war, which, by the way, was heavily unleashed on a lot of the civilian population. In fact, it's a series of etchings that were called The Great Miseries of War, which I think there's about 18 of them that were made at one point. And the one that's the most famous, which you're looking at in that picture, is called The Hanging, which is number 11 out of the 18 etchings. And there's even been, I'll show you, there's been like a colorized version I think they've made also as well, which I think was done later, where they kind of painted it what maybe it looked like. What it does, it actually depicts these Catholic mercenaries that are being hanged for committing atrocities, where I guess they went into a village and killed a bunch of people, like civilians. They're actually being hanged by their own side, like the Catholics are hanging the Catholics because of what they basically did with it. And that kind of describes, how basically the war went. So the 30 Years' War really, changed Europe, afterwards because of that with the Reformation. But it was actually, like I said, one of the last major events of the Reformation, really, that would occur. A lot of your later wars are going to be more based on what is like politics, economics, and other things that are also there as well. Now, I did want to show you a little video clip. It's kind of for just like a humorous thing for it, but kind of like the Monty Python version of what happened at Westphalia or in Westphalia, Western Germany. So I'll kind of show you this little video clip, their version of it.
So, we're agreed. France gets the city of Pinerolo and the bishopric of Metz, and to Sweden goes Western Pomerania, Wismar, Stettin, and the islands of Rügen and Pearl. Oh, lovely. And England, for applying within 28 days, gets this charming carriage cloth.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very kind.
All right, well, I think that concludes our treaty. Gentlemen, a toast. Peace in Europe.
Peace in Europe.
Excellent.
Excuse me.
Oh, what is it now? Why are you interrupting?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but what about Luxembourg?
He's right. Nobody owns Luxembourg.
France, do you own Luxembourg?
No, we thought it was Dutch.
Sweden?
No, we thought it was Belgium.
England?
Well, we just knew it was on the continent and didn't give a toss, really.
It looks as if Luxembourg has slipped through our net, doesn't it? Well, we've got a country going up for grabs. Anybody interested?
Is it Protestant?
Mostly Catholic, I believe.
Let's just use it for storage.
Oh, yeah, good. No, that's good.
No, it's not good. Someone's got to take it. Come on, who wants it? What's it consist of?
The small state of Luxembourg is a charming reminder of how Europe used to be. Plague victims crawl elegantly down its dung-filled streets, greasing the way with pus from their buboes, while at least 2 children a week are burned as the devil in the handsome market square. The town boasts 2 taverns, one humorous dwarf, and a shop that sells little things made of straw.
Yeah, sounds like Stevenage.
Well, who wants it then?
Well, we don't want it. We've already got to do up West Pomerania, not to mention Wismar and Stettin.
France has no need of Luxembourg, although I do quite like the sound of that shop selling little things made out of straw.
Yes, that shop is an economic bonus, isn't it? All right, I'll take it.
Good, excellent. So, Luxembourg goes to Sweden.
No, hold on. You can't just give Sweden another province.
But you didn't want it.
Well, yeah, but that means that they've now got Western Pomerania, Stettin, and Luxembourg. That's not fair.
We need Luxembourg to store our pickled herring.
Why can't you store them in Sweden?
Oh, the whiff.
You Swedes and your pickled herring. Why can't you eat a proper fish?
What's wrong with pickled herring?
Nothing if you're Swedish.
No, gentlemen, please.
What is that supposed to mean?
No, well, come on. Just because we all hate the Germans doesn't mean we have to like the Swedes.
The Swedes are all right.
Well, they hate you.
No, we don't. We don't hate anybody.
We don't hate anybody. Well, you should. Makes life more fun.
Look, all we wanted to do was protect the Protestant princes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really.
Why, you didn't fancy just kicking some German arse? That's why we were there.
That's what rather appealed to us, too.
Gentlemen, please, let's not unravel the tapestry of this treaty ere the shuttle has crossed the loom.
What?
Let's not cock it out now. We're so close. I have a proposal. Why not split Luxembourg in two? Sweden can get the east and France the west.
Excellent.
Good. No, that's good. That's good.
Sorry.
Oh, what do you want now?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but is it truly wise to divide a land in so wild and ragged a fashion? In future years, there will be Swedish Luxembourgers and French Luxembourgers, Protestant and Catholic, both at each other's throats.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think that'll give journalists of the future something to write about. No, I'm satisfied with this. I think this is good. I think in the future all our petty squabbles over Europe will be forgotten. It'll just be one huge state, probably with a single currency. Oh, hurrah! Yeah, that's a nice thought.
It is. I'm going to have to opt out over that one, I'm afraid. We're more interested in our new colony in America.
Yes, America. America has given us nothing but tobacco and potatoes and that new high-grade narcotic that you're so fond of. No, gentlemen, I think on the crucible of war we have forged a new Europe. Right. So who's for a
Pint.
Half litre.
Lager.
Bitter.
Finest claret.
Oh, I'd love a pickled herring.
Sweet, and your pickled herring, honestly. Well, it's getting...
Forgive me.
Oh, she's back. What now?
Forgive me, Ambassador, but there is one more task. The savage land of the Balkans.
Oh, coitus. We forgot the Balkans. Well, look, here we are. 1, 2, 3 there. Look, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, Greater Serbia. Everyone satisfied?
Well,
What else? I think, gentlemen, we have guaranteed the peace and freedom of Europe for forever.
May I say, Ambassador, that with this historic redrafting of the European borders, you are really spoiling us. These, on the other hand, are revolting.
And so, with lightened hearts but heavy irony, the treaty was signed.
Yeah, it probably caused World War I if you think about it. Well, separating the Balkans, and all that. So, anyway, that's pretty much it this week for lectures on the Reformation. Now, I did want one more thing before we go. Remind you, I am posting, of course, a new quiz this week on the Reformation. Of course, I'll post it, of course, in quizzes. I think there should be an announcement about that. And I am continuing a discussion on the study guide questions, of course, on the Reformation. I'll add some more questions on that for bonus, those that want to do that as well. So that's pretty much it for the week. I don't think there's anybody had any questions. Look like it. Just mostly students saying good morning and all that. But y'all take care, of course, and have a great weekend coming up. So I'll send further announcements, of course, about stuff coming up next week and all that. So y'all take care and all that.